Disclaimer. The views expressed are strictly my own and does not represent anyone or any entity that I might be associated with. This is strictly a critique commentary that should be taken as a tool to help others further their writings, their comics, character development, and serve as a warning as to what to look out for in their writings. I am re-uploading this video based on feedback. Yes, I am open to critique and encourage it, unlike some artists that I know. This is my introduction into the home comic critique series created by the author Keek Norden. Although I'm going to be saying Keek, I'm including Staz into this critique as well, since she has made it clear that she co-writes the home comic and has inserted her characters in the work. I am not sure if she's being paid, but in all honesty, it's an irrelevant detail, but know that there are two people that are responsible for this train wreck of a comic. The reason I feel I need to critique this comic is that there are a lot of things that could have been done better, and the comic should serve as an example as to what not to do when you write a story, comic or otherwise. Don't get me wrong, the comic did have a good ideas going for it at the beginning, but after chapter 6, authorial bias created a lot of unnecessary drama and caused the protagonists to have a 180 done to their personalities. In all, what was once a story about survival devolved into a fanfiction yaoi piece featuring unlikable characters. Although it might appear that the comic is good looking at the comments section, you have to understand that they and their mods heavily censor comments that contain any criticism. Val briefly touched on this topic in her video, and watching what has been happening over the years, I can attest that they haven't changed. The only reason why the comment section keeps being open and systematically closed every so often is that there is no formal script that they are working with for the comic, and they are ghostwriting. This is why some scenes that you think would take 4 or 5 pages to explain are condensed into 2, and sex scenes, like the ones that have Romer and Rogio, takes up to several pages. Now, I'm not saying that they are wrong for showing explicit works, but the problem comes from how the story was initially presented to the public and what it has devolved into now. If Keek wanted to do a personal romance featuring his favorite characters, then he should say so. We are at page 680 by the time I'm creating this video. In that time, there has been nothing substantial that has happened to the characters as far as plot goes. You can say that a character moved from point A to point B, but in truth, there are no conflicts within the story, which mean that there is no tension. And no tension makes it a boring read. This is also why the characters fall flat. Keek has a habit of highlighting unimportant things such as Romer and Rogio fucking, and won't even try to bother world build on the other non-sexual relationships to the point where the world building and lore suffers from it. That sadly deserves its own video, so I won't go too in depth with it, but I believe that this comic is only 10% of the total potential that it should be. These segments will illustrate this in detail. I want you to know that I have always said that Keek has good ideas, but they are executed poorly because he clearly favors characters over each other and refuses to let the plot develop in a natural and competent way. Now, although I am criticizing Keek for his work, I do wish that those that are current and maybe even past readers will understand my stance, since I'm challenging you to critically think about the points that I mentioned. Think of your favorite story or comic and then compare it to what is going on in home. Those that defend Keek are only enabling his behavior to continue both within the comic and outside of it. It's time that genuine fans call out the comic for what it is. Yes, it does have beautiful spots within the story, but to say that this is the best thing since sliced bread was invented doesn't help the creator grow at all. We as readers should want the author to have experience moving forward, and critique cannot always be good if you want to push them to their limits. So I ask you to keep this in the back of your mind as you listen to my topics regarding this comic. Thank you.